The other alternative route to this end is regime change, which is the Israelis go in, they bash Iran, and the end result is that the Ayatollahs are overthrown. You get a liberal democracy, and that liberal democracy or those new leaders show no interest in acquiring nuclear weapons. I think that's a pipe dream.
So John Mearsheimer recently went on Judging Freedom to react for the first time to Israel's strike against Iran, and he explains why he believes regime change there was always the plan from the jump, and also why this is so catastrophic for the U.S. Let's watch and let's react. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
Professor John Mearsheimer joins us now. Professor Mearsheimer, it's a pleasure. We originally scheduled this to continue our session from the other day when we had internet problems. And of course, since then, the world in the Middle East has changed. What's your initial analysis of the Israeli attack on Iran?
I think it's clearly a massive attack. I mean, they're attacking in waves. They're attacking all over the country. And they've made it clear that this is just the beginning. So this is a major conflict, and the Israelis are well aware that the Iranians are going to retaliate. We don't know exactly what that retaliation looks like. So you're basically going to have a situation where we go up the escalation ladder. And then the question becomes, what does it look like at the end when this is finally concluded?
Yeah, they have retaliated since this. There's been several strikes within Tel Aviv, including a military center. Of course, one of Israel's first strikes was in a residential area in Tehran. They're trying to decapitate some of the heads of the Iranian government. But he's right. This is a big strike, and the U.S. is already involved. It's only a question of how deeply, because we know that the U.S. provides intelligence to Israel. They provide immense funding, $4 billion per year before October 7th, and it seems like they are aware of this drone program that was built up over time within Iran that played a role in the initial attacks.
Do we know if the Iranian offensive, Chris is back in his element here, do we know, Chris the dog, not producer Chris, do we know if the Iranian offensive weaponry has been impacted by this attack?
Well, I think there's no question that some of it has. The question is how much. The Iranians have a lot of that, a lot of those missiles, cruise missiles and ballistic missiles hidden underground. And furthermore, there are just limits to how many of the missiles can be attacked by the Israelis because they can only put so many aircraft over the target. But at the same time, I think it's quite clear that the Iranians got caught with their pants down. This was a surprise attack. Scott Ritter on the show earlier today talked about this being Iran's Pearl Harbor. I think that is an apt analogy here. So I think it is clear the Israelis did get more than a few ballistic and cruise missiles, but how many remains to be seen.
And here's why they were caught with their pants down. Because Trump was leading them to think that actual peace negotiations were happening. In fact, there were supposed to be additional peace negotiations under, the guise of a potential deal like the JCPOA to curtail Iran's nuclear program to happen the day after these strikes. And it isn't entirely clear yet, but it really seems like there's a scenario in which Trump just led them down this path of complacency, knowing that Israel was going to strike. In fact, he might have made them posture in a way that this decapitation strategy was even possible. So we'll have to learn a little bit more about that as days go on. But they were caught with their pants down for the reason of thinking they could negotiate in good faith with the U.S. And, so many part of our, negotiating partners have found that out down the line throughout history. One great example is Gaddafi, who, after he gave up his weapons program, including a kind of infantile nuclear weapons program, he was couped by an offensive war led by the U.S. and NATO and overthrown.
I just had to get up and close the door.
Looks like the dog is
insulate us from Chris's
dog problems.
Expressing his opinion on all these things. there doesn't seem to be any question about United States involvement after reading what the president said. I'm not so sure it was wise what he said, but I'd like to read it out loud since it's a Truth Social posting. Chris, if you want to put it up, please. This is the president of the United States about 6:15 this morning Eastern time. I gave Iran chance after chance to make a deal. I told them in the strongest of words to just do it, but no matter how hard they tried, no matter how close they got, they just couldn't get it done. I told them it would be much worse than anything they know, anticipated, or were told, that the United States makes the best and most lethal military equipment anywhere in the world by far, in caps, and that Israel has a lot of it with much more to come, and they know how to use it. Certain Iranian hardliners spoke bravely, but they didn't know what was about to happen. They are all dead, in caps, now, and it will only get worse. There has already been great death and destruction, but there is still time to make this slaughter, with the next already planned attacks being even far more brutal, come to an end. Iran must make a deal before there is nothing left, and save what was once known as the Iranian Empire. No more death, no more destruction. Just do it before it's too late. God bless you all. The anti-war president saying, if you don't negotiate the way we want you to, we'll kill you, either directly or through our proxy, Benjamin Netanyahu. Is that the way you read that?
Yeah, there's no question about it.
Yeah, this is the U.S.'s new form of diplomacy, where you bomb first and then use that as potential leverage for a negotiation. But who can trust you in any kind of negotiation if that's your tactic? Because it really seems like the Iranians were lured into a false sense of security here. And, you know, Tulsi Gabbard got up on stage and said that Iran does not have a nuclear weapon. All those lies time and time again throughout time about how they are weeks away, months away, days away. I think Netanyahu alleged that in like 20 different examples that I've seen, you know, thrown out there on social media. She said there's no even evidence that they've restarted their nuclear weapons program after dismantling it in, I believe, 2005. And then you had the JCPOA in either 2014 or 2015 from Obama, maybe the only good foreign policy, you know, angle that Obama ever took to anything. And that was, you know, ripped up by Trump. So this is really tragic. The nuclear disarmament angle is a total farce. They know that it doesn't have a nuclear weapon. And Tulsi Gabbard, you know, she said otherwise, and Trump handpicked his director of national intelligence. He didn't pick Netanyahu to do his war propaganda. He picked Tulsi, and between the two, he picked Netanyahu.
Just a couple other points. The Times of Israel has a big story that's easily accessible on the internet that makes it clear that Trump colluded with Netanyahu to basically bamboozle the Iranians and make it look like there was not going to be an attack, at least until the negotiations were finished. And in fact, Trump knew the attack was coming as of Monday, and he pretended that he didn't know, and that in fact he was working overtime to make the diplomatic route work. So he's in collusion with the Israelis on this one.
So Professor Sachs, your colleague, and Scott Ritter say that Trump's behavior in this, as you've just outlined it, renders anybody who's negotiating with the United States absolutely suspect about whether or not to believe Donald Trump or anything the United States says. Do you agree with that?
Why wouldn't they?
I agreed with that before these attacks took place. I think any country on the planet that trusts the United States is remarkably foolish. That includes their close allies as well as their adversaries.
Right.
I'm sure that Vladimir Putin doesn't trust Donald Trump as far as he can throw him, and he can't throw him any distance because he can't get his hands on him.
Yeah. I wonder if Donald Trump shared with Marco Rubio, the de jure, not de facto, the de jure Secretary of State, the American involvement, or if Mr. Rubio has a problem with the truth. Here's what he said. This is last night. Tonight, Israel took unilateral action against Iran. We are not involved in strikes against Iran, and our top priority is protecting American forces in the region. Israel advised us that they believe this action was necessary for its self-defense. President Trump and the administration have taken all necessary steps to protect our forces and remain in close contact with our regional partners. Let me be clear, Iran should not target U.S. interests or personnel. There's not a word of truth in the first two sentences there, is there?
No, he was just trying to provide cover early on, but that cover has been blown by today. Let me make a general.
Yeah, this is absolutely true. The U.S. is involved. It's only a question of how deeply we know that they provided intercepting missiles to stop, the Iranian counterattack on Israel. And we know that the U.S. was aware of this strike happening before it did. Now, the Iranian regime has promised to attack U.S. bases in the area if U.S. participates in offensive strikes against Iran, which that would be the worst thing, because that would draw the U.S. into a guaranteed hot war into Ukraine. And the twisted incentive structure of the Israelis at this point, the Israeli government, I should say, is that they want that to happen. They want U.S. troops to die so that they get the U.S. to come into this war to be full bore on in terms of regime change. That's the operation Netanyahu has always wanted. He said he wants the Libya model applied within Iran. Well, what was that? It was deposing Gaddafi's regime. That's what Netanyahu's always wanted. He's talked about it since the early 2000s at the very least. He, appeared as an expert in congressional testimony and said overthrowing Iraq would send immensely positive reverberations throughout the region and make it more peaceful. Well, that doesn't seem to have happened. So we know the U.S. is involved. The cover's been blown, as Mearsheimer has said, and we have to, pray and think for peace here, because there is a real chance of a false flag operation drawing the U.S. in. And, that to be the end of it. Israel is not going to stand alone in this thing. That's clear.
Point about what I think is going on here.
Please do.
I think Trump has fallen into a trap that the Israelis set. What I mean by that is I think Israel's ultimate goal here is to make sure Iran does not get nuclear weapons. But they don't have the capability to do that by themselves. So what the Israelis are doing here with this attack is, number one, they're putting an end to the negotiations. There's not going to be any more negotiations. That's meaningless at this point. But furthermore, they're drawing us into the fight. The Iranians are going to retaliate, and we have said that we will help defend the Israelis. Furthermore, this war is going to escalate, and we are going to get drawn in. Trump has already made it clear that he is standing with the Israelis. And what Trump has wanted to do was avoid a war, and he wanted to settle this one diplomatically. Well, there's no diplomatic solution possible now, and he is in the war with the Iranians.
Yeah, I think Mearsheimer is exactly correct here. This is exactly how Trump and the U.S. administration has been played. Israel knows that with the U.S. at its back, and this, goes for any theater of war it's been involved with, they can get away with doing much more militarily in their own interests with the U.S. at its back. And if you're to draw the U.S. in, the best way to do it would be to attack U.S. soldiers in the Middle East, which again should not be there in the first place. The wise America First route is to bring those troops home, bring all those resources home. That includes resources in the Arabian Peninsula, in Syria, in Iraq, blockading Yemen still after a decade of starvation that's gone on there. It only creates animosities and attracts new enemies to the U.S. We've seen this play out through my entire lifetime. Through the last half century, it's a disaster, and Mearsheimer is totally right. The desire among the Israeli government is to draw the U.S. in. They're doing a remarkable job so far, and I don't know if, a full draw-in of the U.S. can even be resisted at this point.
The allurement to American presidents of the opportunity to kill people in foreign countries must be utterly irresistible. This so-called anti-war, pro-peace president, we're going to play a clip in just a minute of his, at the time, his surrogates, now members of his cabinet, praising him for being anti-war, is funding the war in Gaza even more so than Joe Biden, continues to fund an utterly losing effort in Ukraine. And now the neocons are triumphant and the Zionists are triumphant by dragging us into eventually a war against Iran, which has posed zero threat to American national security. So much for the anti-war president.
It's hard to disagree with that. The only thing I disagree with that you said is I don't call it a war in Gaza. I call it a genocide.
It is, and I'm entirely with you, and I still.
Yeah, Napolitano was right here. Obviously, Iran was not a threat to the U.S. national security at all. That's the propaganda that they could, nuke us tomorrow. We're back to weapons of mass destruction. That whole propaganda campaign in 2002 and 2003, it's reared its ugly head again, and it's even more of a farce now because there's no indication that Iran has a nuclear weapon. If they did, you may have even seen it already. You may have seen it detonate over Israel. So they were not a threat to project any form of military might to the U.S., but the U.S., of course, is acting on behalf of Israel, as it often has done in the Middle East. Netanyahu and the Israeli government wanted the overthrow of Assad in Syria, overthrow of Saddam, overthrow of Libya's government and Gaddafi. Time and time again, the U.S. gets bogged down in these stupid excursions that never benefit us, and now we're being dragged into a power that's been more powerful than all three of those probably combined. Iran is not a dog like Yemen. They have cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, drones that we've already seen some of, and they've already kind of depleted, it seems like, some of their older weaponry and the retaliatory strikes. But we'll have to see how this transpires over the next few days. I don't like it one bit.
Incorrect. Chris, play the clip of Tulsi Gabbard and Bobby Kennedy.
A vote for Donald Trump is a vote for a man who wants to end wars, not start them.
He said, I want to end the wars.
And who has demonstrated already that he has the courage and strength to stand up and fight for peace.
I want to end this surveillance and censorship.
Did we choose censorship or freedom?
I want to protect the Constitution. I want to protect freedom of speech.
History will
Unless you criticize Israel.
look back on us at this moment for the choice that we make. Did we choose war or peace?
Yeah, that basically says it all. That clip encapsulated the non-interventionist rhetoric of the Trump campaign that contrasts so starkly and so fiercely with how Trump has operated so far. He's already bombed Yemen. Thankfully, that seems to have mostly come to a close, but that was on behest of Israel too, because Yemen was one of the few countries in the region that was providing aid to the Palestinians. And initially, the U.S. got involved in that war to placate the Saudis. The Saudis hated the fact that the U.S. removed Saddam from power because they knew it would create a vacuum to allow for more Shia influence from Iran. So the U.S. got involved in that starvation blockade in Saudi Arabia, and now Trump was bombing Yemen. We had the famous signal leak story. I covered it on the channel. But now the U.S. is full bore supporting Israel in this war against Iran, which Trump seems to have kind of quashed to some extent from a U.S. perspective. A few months ago, there were all those stories that Trump stopped a war in Iran. Well, it doesn't seem like he ultimately did. And we know that there are competing factions within Trump's cabinet on this question, where supposedly Tulsi Gabbard and J.D. Vance don't want strikes against Iran. And obviously, Marco Rubio and some of those other characters do. That's not surprising. And there were things that were redeemable relative to the status quo when it came to Trump's foreign policy in his first term. But whenever, the fiercest Trump fans would say stuff like, well, a new war didn't start under Trump. Well, yeah, that's true, but that's a convenient way of skirting the fact that he escalated wars in both Yemen and Syria in his first term. And he did ramp up the bombing in Afghanistan for a time during his first term. So there were things to be hopeful for in regard to Trump's foreign policy. It seems like he got duped by his generals a few times. He certainly did. They lied to him about troop levels a few times to kind of keep the wars carried on. But then once you're duped by that, why do you just fall into the same traps when they come from Netanyahu? Well, the Israel lobby has immense influence, and the U.S. follows the foreign policy of Israel so many times.
Every one of those statements, which were made at the Republican National Convention last summer, has been defied poignantly by Donald Trump. From freedom of speech, ask some Muslims on the Columbia University campus, to these perpetual wars.
I don't disagree. I don't know what else to say.
Yeah.
I mean, Trump, I did not think Trump would turn out to be a warmonger, but he has. I mean, what else can you say?
Here.
It's really sobering to hear Mearsheimer said that, because up to Trump's election and after Trump's election, he continued to refer to him as a man of peace. He really believed that Trump was a guy that broke the mold of so many of the neocon-leaning, war-first presidents that we've had in the past. And he realized, there were some realistic caveats to that. Obviously, he's in the bed with the Israel lobby, and Miriam Adelson gave him $1 million. But Mearsheimer has been more optimistic about Trump than, some others in kind of that orbit in terms of foreign policy. Maybe Sachs is similar in Mearsheimer to a way. You can tell that Sachs is super disappointed with how this has played out lately. But guys like Aaron Mattei and Max Blumenthal and some others were not as trustworthy of, Trump's foreign policy and how it would play out. So it really is sobering to hear Mearsheimer say that. It's saddening. It's frustrating. There's no other way to say it. We're here, on the verge of entering another theater of war. As if Ukraine wasn't enough. As if Gaza wasn't enough. As if Iraq wasn't enough. There's still 1,000 soldiers there. As if Syria wasn't enough. There's still a third of that territory being occupied by U.S. soldiers in the Northeast while they persecute and execute Christians there. We have, it's not enough to be involved in Yemen still. This is yet another potential forever war that could bleed the U.S. Treasury. We're already almost $37 trillion into debt, all for the sake of the military-industrial complex, the Israel lobby that wants regime change there and always has.
Here he is himself in his inaugural address, January 20th.
We will measure our success not only by the battles we win, but also by the wars that we end, and perhaps most importantly, the wars we never get into.
Amen. That's the rhetoric everyone loved and a lot of people voted for. That is rhetoric that's being betrayed as we speak.
Do you think that the true purpose of this attack, from the perspective of the Israelis and maybe from the perspective of the United States, all right, I'm complicating the question, but nothing's too complex for John Mearsheimer. Do you think that the true purpose of this attack was to degrade the Iranian ability to enrich uranium, or to bring about regime change in Iran?
Well, I do not think the Israelis have the capability to eliminate the nuclear enrichment capability that the Iranians have, certainly at the Fordow installation. But even, I think, at Natanz, it's just not in the cards. I think it's only the Americans who might, and I want to underline the word might, be able to do that. But I think, as I said before, the attack is mainly designed to get the Americans in the fight, to end the negotiations, so that we can make sure that Iran does not acquire nuclear weapons. In other words, we, the United States. The other alternative route to this end is regime change, which is the Israelis go in, they bash Iran, and the end result is that the Ayatollahs are overthrown. You get a liberal democracy, and that liberal democracy or those new leaders show no interest in acquiring nuclear weapons. I think that's a pipe dream. I tend to believe the Israelis understand that's a pipe dream. I mean, first of all, you want to look at all the states around the world that have nuclear weapons. A good number of them are liberal democracies. The United States and Britain and India have nuclear weapons. France has nuclear weapons. These are liberal democracies. Moreover, if you're the Iranians, what's the message that you take from what's happened here, whether you're a liberal Democrat or you're an Ayatollah? The lesson is that you should have gotten nuclear weapons a long time ago. And now you definitely have to get them in the future, because if you had nuclear weapons, this wouldn't have happened.
This is so true. This is a point that's so poignantly made and not made by that many people, but he's exactly right. The incentive structure is such that it's good to acquire nuclear weapons. That will protect your regime from being overthrown. That's what North Korea learned. They acquired nuclear weapons, and there were normalized relations with them in Trump's first term. In fact, that's the best thing I think Trump ever did in terms of foreign policy, if you ask me. But Gaddafi, who gave up his nuclear weapon program in the mid-2000s, he suffered a regime change operation by NATO and the U.S. So what in their right minds would cause people to believe that giving up your nuclear weapons is a good thing? Iranians have to have watched this history played out and learned that. Now, it still would have been good for the U.S. to secure that kind of deal with Iran, from my perspective, because it would take off the table the pretext for exactly what's happening now, this Iranian regime change. And by the way, Israel has nuclear weapons. Have they admitted it? No. Will they admit it? No. Why? Because if they admit that, they'd have to be subject to inspections. And, Iran, it's the biggest problem that Iran has a nuclear weapon, which they don't. And they don't have the capability to create one right now, according to the Director of National Intelligence. But Israel has one, and they're allowed to have one despite what they've done in places like Gaza. It's crazy. And I'm no fan of any regime, any government. But the fact that that is such a double standard is crazy.
Look at North Korea. North Korea got nuclear weapons. Kim Jong-un is thriving in North Korea. Colonel Gaddafi got rid of his weapons of mass destruction program. He's now 3 feet under. And look at what's happening to the Iranians. So the message is clear here. And I think that tells you that regime change is not going to do the trick. So what the Israelis want is they want us to do the dirty work. It's very important to understand that the Israelis have reached the point where they are remarkably dependent on us.
Yes.
If you look at the weaponry that was used against the Iranians, and I think this includes intelligence too, if you look at the weaponry that's used in the genocide, it's the Americans who provide that weaponry. Right. And the Israelis are depending on us to help defend them when the Iranians retaliate. So they are deeply dependent on us. And it's therefore hardly unsurprising that they're looking to us to solve their problem.
This is so true. I think he absolutely nails it there. The U.S. administration is being worked by the Israeli government. The Israeli government knows that they can't just, remove the regime of Iran on their own. So now they're in this political gamesmanship, trying to do their best to draw the U.S. into it. Whether it's a false flag or not, I hope that there's no attack on U.S. troops in the region in the future, because that truly will draw the U.S. into war. We know that will. Regime change is always disastrous. It has been my entire lifetime. Overthrowing the Taliban, we spent billions of dollars, hundreds of thousands of lives over 20 years to replace the Taliban with the Taliban. In Iraq, countless amounts of treasure expended there, thousands of U.S. lives dedicated to overthrowing that government. 1 million Iraqis died, and now they've been replaced with Islamic fundamentalists. It's absolutely crazy. Syria's government was overthrown, and now it's basically targeting Christians for persecution. At least Assad, despite how, treacherous he may have been, actually had tolerance for religious minorities. We have not seen that, from this new regime. And it's just crazy. Regime change never pays off. Iran is ironically the best example of that, because the CIA organized a regime change operation there, Operation Ajax, with the British in 1953 that elevated the Shah. And the Shah, he created a secret police, the Savak units, and a surveillance state that created a reaction among fundamentalists to overthrow that government in 78 and 79. And that's the regime that still remains there today. So for there to be even on the table the prospect of a new regime change operation in Iran, after all the failures on regime change, including within Iran, is absolutely crazy. The U.S. cannot get drawn into this. The better solution, as always, is to withdraw all forces from the Middle East, cut all ties with Israel, get out of their nonsense foreign policy crusades in the Middle East. That would serve Americans well, and yet it's almost never on the table. Almost no U.S. politician talks about it, except for a select few. In my lifetime, Dennis Kucinich and Ron Paul, Rand Paul, Thomas Massey, Justin Amash, they've talked about it, but few others. I'm forgetting some, maybe, but there are a select few that truly want that type of foreign policy. But I do want to hear from you in the comments below. Will the U.S. get fully drawn into this war? And how catastrophic will it be for the U.S.? Or do you think the U.S. can actually stay out of it and just defend Israel, but not be involved? Let me know in the comments below. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, consider joining as a YouTube member. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, no more empire. Peace out, guys. Catch you in the next one.